So you're ready to jump to the exciting world of astrophotography? Well, welcome aboard. It's a very fun hobby that can get very addictive very quick. So what equipment should you get if you're just starting astrophotography? Well, this really just depends on which niche you're in. If you're in the world of deep sky astrophotography, if you're in the world of solar imaging or planetary imaging, it really just depends. But if you're in the world of deep sky, the most important thing would be a mount. I would definitely recommend getting a very robust mount. It doesn't have to be super expensive. Like, I personally love my Skywatch EQM35 Pro, but it's kind of outdated at this point. I would go for something like the GTI, Star Adventure GTI. That's a pretty good one. Also, another thing important in deep sky astrophotography is definitely the camera. I've learned this is like the second most important thing. The camera is very crucial. You don't necessarily have to get a deep sky astrophotography camera, especially if you're just starting out, but an easy thing to do if you don't want to use all the controls of a deep sky astrophotography camera like on a computer. I would definitely go for something like the ASI Air, while you can control it on your phone, but that's too complicated for right now. Let's just get into the basics. If you don't want any of that starting out, I would just say go for a DSLR. That's like the minimum you should probably have for astrophotography. So like the Canon EOS Rebel T7, that was a good one that I had. I really liked it, but another thing is you got to get modified eventually. We don't need to go into that yet. But a modified basically means you could like view nebulae that are infrared wavelengths of light, and you don't necessarily have to collect tons of integration time. And that's all stuff we'll get into. But definitely get a DSLR just starting out. A Canon Canon EOS Rebel T7, very good camera. Definitely get something like that. And then the lens. Well, what lens would you get? It really just depends on what type of astrophotography you want to do. Do you want to do close-ups of like galaxies and nebulae? Do you want to just do the Milky Way? If you want to do the Milky Way, get like, you know, a Rokinon 14mm f2.8. That's a really good lens. If you want to do like, you know, zoomed in galaxies, nebulae, the smaller stuff in the sky, get something like the Rokinon 135mm f2. That's a really good lens as well for like wide field shots of the smaller objects. So like if you want to do Andromeda, Horsehead Nebula, or the whole entire Orion constellation, that is a good lens to start out. Plus it's really sharp. You'll get the sharp round stars. They're really nice and crisp. I definitely had that Rokinon, and it was a really good lens. So I don't have it anymore, but I used to have it. I really liked it. So another really crucial thing to get in the realm of astrophotography, especially if you're just starting out, is an intervalometer. And these really only work with DSLRs, but I definitely recommend getting an intervalometer because it'll really help you, you know, keep time going. You don't have to sit outside, click the button. That's not the way to do it anyway. Or you don't even have to constantly come back out and reset the camera to make sure it keeps taking images. You can just have an intervalometer take tons for you and set the exact amount of exposure time you want. That way you don't over brighten it or over darken it, which is called overexposing or underexposing. So you don't want to do either of those. So if you're getting into astrophotography, I definitely recommend an intervalometer. So those should get you started in deep sky astrophotography. Those four things are the four primary things you must have in astrophotography in order to get an amazing image. Now the mount is kind of an exception if you don't plan on tracking, or if you're doing a very wide field shot that doesn't really require tracking. But the more you zoom in, the more it will require tracking, or the more likely you would need to track, because those exposure times will just keep getting shorter because the stars will do something called trailing, and they'll basically smear across the image and everything will be basically blurry. Not out of focus, but blurry. Also, a bonus tip for you astrophotographers out there, I would definitely recommend, if you are, you know, getting into it and you don't know what ISO to put your camera at, usually a good ISO for any particular camera, if you're on a track mount, is anywhere from 800 to 1600. Those are usually good. For the Canon EOS Rebel T7, it's 1600. For the Sony, actually, it's 400, but 800 is usually to 1600 is usually the typical range. And normally, since the night sky is usually pretty dim, like the objects you're photographing, you want to make sure that your aperture is large. So like f2.8, you don't want to have it set to f5.6, for example, unless you're really particular on the edges of the image frame and you want to make sure those are sharp as possible. Then maybe bump it up like, you know, 0.1. I mean, you know, 1.0, just as much as it takes to kind of round out the edges and make sure they're flat across the whole field. Oh, and by the way, my name is Asher, and I make astrophotography videos on planetary imaging, solar astrophotography a little bit, and deep sky, obviously. So if you like that kind of content, make sure to subscribe. Anyways, until next time, clear skies.